urban wildlife? And if you can just put your response in the chat. All right, so while those responses are coming in, I'm going to try to get this slideshow going. Let's see. Share. Great. And all right, can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Okay, appreciate it. All right, so a little bit of context. I am a city girl from Philly. And so I grew up not knowing very much about wildlife, not knowing very much about careers in wildlife, not being exposed very much to wildlife. And yet I had this passion and enthusiasm for animals. And so my first job was at the Philadelphia Zoo, and I got to go to Kenya when I was about 13 years old. And so that was my transformative experience and how I set the kind of trajectory on becoming a wildlife biologist. So people often ask me, right, how did the city girl from Philadelphia become a wildlife biologist? And so that's the origin story. In the context of the work that I'm doing now, so I run a research lab at Yale University. I used to be at University of Michigan, which is where this urban wildlife project started, and that's monitoring wildlife throughout the city. Now I'm at Yale and I run the Applied Wildlife Ecology Lab. The acronym is ALL. So we care a lot about inspiring and appreciation and wonder for the natural world. And ironically, as I was thinking about my career trajectory and how I wanted to do science and what I wanted science to look like, I never thought that I was actually going to have urban ecology as a part of my portfolio. I wanted to go to these distant wild places with tigers and lions and bears. And increasingly, I recognize that these human-wildlife interactions are really pivotal to not only understanding and promoting wildlife conservation, but also building advocacy and empathy for wildlife, for species that we have in our backyards. And so there's really this growing interest in ultimately making sure that the work and the science that I do creates and promotes coexistence between wildlife and people. And so I'll fast forward now and talk just a little bit about the project that we have in Detroit. So we use remote cameras as one of our key monitoring tools. And we've been working in the city for about 9 years now. And we have remote cameras placed in about 25 different parks throughout the city. So Palmer and Chandler and Rouge and O'Hare and Farnwell, literally all across the city. And we're interested in trying to understand how animals are using that space. But we also recognize that it's a shared space. So we get pictures of all types of activities that happen in urban parks. I'll just say that. But the goal is not to certainly monitor people. But the reality is that these are shared spaces. And so we've done our due diligence in terms of making sure that the images are not disseminated that capture people. We have signage throughout the parks that notify the public that the cameras are out there. Our contact information is there. And we facilitate lots of community conversations about the work that we're doing. And so some of the research questions that we're asking is trying to understand behavior, trying to understand their movement, trying to understand how species are interacting with each other, but then also understanding how human activity, specifically around domestic species, alter some of those interactions and alter how wildlife are using some of the spaces. So in addition to having the cameras out, some of the other activities that we've done include collecting soil for a project related to eDNA or environmental DNA. So as animals and organisms and people are moving through environments, DNA is literally getting sloughed off of species. And you can capture that in vehicles or mediums like air or water or soil. And so we've collected soil as another monitoring tool and done these molecular analysis to detect species that are also using the space. So we have this very visual method with using the cameras, and then we have a more forensic style kind of method using soil to capture what the wildlife species and presence are throughout the city. We've also done a couple of experiments, which has been really exciting because as a carnivore ecologist, it's very, very hard to do experiments. Animals move and they're big and there's lots of protocols. But we've implemented 2 experiments in the city. One included, oh, this guy is like rolling around. I hope you guys are checking out the photos. We've done 2 experiments. One has included trying to understand the effect of domestic species. And so we partnered with the Michigan Humane Society and we literally brought out shelter dogs. I love dogs. I don't have one. So it was a really fun activity for us to partner so that we could monitor and essentially manipulate the presence of dogs and then do this before and after comparison to see, well, when you increase dog presence into these parks, are wildlife then shifting their behavior? Are they more nocturnal? Are they more diurnal? Do they avoid the space? And then the second experiment we did involved us playing different sounds. So the sound of people talking, the sound of dogs barking, the sound of a wolf, to see how the fear response could potentially be induced by having these audio cues throughout the city. So those were 2 of the experiments that we've done. We're trying to get to a 10-year data set for us to, again, monitoring wildlife across the city. And then we'll see what happens after that. And then the last thing I want to share very briefly is that because we work very hard to make sure that we can disseminate the science, I always try to create opportunities for different kinds of partnerships and opportunities to just broadly engage with public or the community. And so we've partnered with the Detroit Zoo. We've interacted with a number of after-school programs. We've developed a curriculum called Wildlife Neighbors, where elementary school kids can analyze these camera trap images and come up with their own research questions. And so really interested in always making sure that there's this partnership and opportunity for everyone for us to do kind of community science and thinking about dissemination and opportunities for engagement and partnership more broadly. I'm also really involved in thinking about media and science communication. So the last thing I want to show you guys, we haven't finished the slideshow, but there's tons and tons and tons of more pictures. But I just wanted to highlight an episode actually that we have coming out, and maybe we can link to things afterwards or put some additional materials together for those that are interested. I'm going to see if I can share one more thing. It's about 50 seconds. If I can get my share screen together, share. Okay, thumbs up if we can see this. Great.
There's something special about working in a city like
Hear it?
Detroit. It's a really abundant, rich ecosystem to work in. So it says it is 70 meters this way. Apparently, I look a little odd walking around Detroit with my backpack and my GPS, and people are like, yo, what are you doing? As an ecologist, I study species interactions, and working in this particular urban environment allows me to ask really cool questions about how wildlife is responding and adjusting in a human-dominated landscape, and what type of human-wildlife conflicts could emerge. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is ensure some type of harmony for both wildlife and people sharing space together.
Okay, so that is an episode that we have coming out actually next week for PBS and Tango Bank Studio. And so hopefully we can put a link so that you are able to see the episode that features Detroit and the work that we're doing. And with that, I will stop. And not sure how we're doing Q&A or questions, but really excited to talk more about urban wildlife and answer any questions that you have. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was very, very cool. See all those images. Yeah, so we're going to give our panelists a chance to speak first, and then we'll do a larger Q&A session at the end. So if we could have our next presenter, Joanne, who worked on a project mapping Detroit's waterways, if you'd like to present.
Okay, let me. See if I can. Okay. Is that working for everyone?
Yep, we can
Thank
see
you.
it.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Joe. I use she, her pronouns, and my Detroit water address is Baby Creek on the Rouge River watershed in the Lake Erie watershed. And I'm just going to share a little bit about the wildlife that I've encountered on the Mapping Detroit Berries Waterways project, which I've called Data Not Data, because I guess I am collecting data, but maybe not in the way that people usually think of data. So you don't collect numbers or track imperial locations of wildlife in the city. But I do encounter a lot of wildlife and enjoy them. I want to acknowledge that actually I'm in England, but I live in Detroit on Anishinaabe land, the land of the Three Fires Confederacy of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, that we call Detroit and is known as Wawiatanong. And I want to recognize the resistance of the people and the land to colonization, including through sieges and blockades, land and water defense, and legal actions in the courts, and that resistance continues today through the use of place names, ceremonies, relationships with non-human and non-animal relatives, and ways we orient ourselves and others to the land. And one of the big resistors of colonialism in Wawiatanong, Detroit, is Wajooshk, the muskrat. Wajooshk has been resisting settler colonialism from the beginning. Wajooshka survived French, British, and U.S. American fur traders, trappers, land speculators, and they continue to resist by reducing invasive marsh plants such as the European frogbit around their lodges. The framework that I work under with the Mapping Detroit Waterways project is a framework of decolonization and indigenization as defined by Dan Wildcat, where decolonization is the process of learning about yourself in relationship to the place where you live and the communities that you live with today. And indigenization is a set of practices that results in processes in which we seriously re-examine and adopt the particular and unique cultures that emerges from the place that we choose to live today, and acknowledge that old ways of living, indigenous ways of living in place, contain useful knowledge for our lives here and now. And when we think about when we think about who or what is indigenous to space, sometimes people have been there so long, or in the case of Abakwesh, the cattail, cattails have been in Michigan so long that we assume that all cattails are indigenous to Michigan, when in fact they aren't. There are both indigenous and invasive cattails found around Wawiatanong. So my project, Mapping Detroit's Buried Waterways, on my travels around Detroit, I've ridden about 280 miles of waterways buried underneath the city. And I've encountered many different plants and animals on my travels. One of the goals of the project is to orient and navigate the Motor City from a perspective of relationship to people and culture and wildlife, rather than a perspective of concrete, and to look to things that connect to water, both permanent and ephemeral, and record them on the map as I travel. So if I see a Canada goose, I will add the Canada goose to the map. If I see a cattail, I would add the cattails to the map. If I see a groundhog, I'll add the groundhog to the map. Now, you might not see the same groundhog at the same place where I saw a groundhog, but this is a map of my experience of following the waterways. And so it doesn't mean that the groundhog shouldn't be on the map just because he's not going to be in the same place the next time somebody comes around. So I feel like it's important to map an experience that might be ephemeral rather than just always mapping things that are permanent. And one of the most fun things about creating a map, especially a map that has animal signs on it, is that I get to create icons that share the localness and share the plants and animals that I encounter. So one of the interpretations that includes some of those icons is this map called The Place of Many Beavers, which is, of course, a translation of Tusha Grande, which is another way of saying Wawiatanong, another way of saying Detroit. And so this map was an opportunity to make plant and animal icons, and also to begin to learn some of the indigenous names of the plants and animals that call Detroit home. And to recognize that a lot of Detroit was originally marshland that was filled in with rubble and trash to create waterfront property. and then that destroyed a lot of the marshland, a lot of the wildlife, and that altered the relationship between the land and the water, creating places where flooding is now inevitable, and that the original indigenous nature of the land, the plants and animals that live there, would have protected areas of the land from flooding in a way that they don't now. So these are just some of my animal icons. There's a few on here. And then in the bottom corner, you see the legend where I started to write down and started to learn the indigenous names of the plants and animals. And then I continued down the animal icon rabbit hole. This is what happens when you go down the animal icon rabbit hole. I was been somewhat inspired by this by a quote from William Bohlhauer, who says, "Only the image and partially the word as toponym allow local place the chance to speak its localness." And so I felt like these icons were an opportunity to sort of speak the localness of Detroit from a different perspective, from a perspective of wildlife, and a perspective of my experience encountering wildlife in the city. So we have a whole bunch of fun plants and animals here. The skunks, the opossums, the groundhogs, the bears, the foxes, weeping willows, the seagulls, and pine martens. And this is only just a small little subsection of the plant and animal icons that I've created for this project. So having created all these lovely pictures of plants and animals, I also collected taken photos of places where plants and animal communities are resisting and being resilient in the face of, sort of continued development in the city. It would be really lovely to see the cities sort of acknowledge and include some of these spaces in development and in urban planning. So that these marsh spaces, these places where the land and the water have resisted, can not be destroyed as a result of urban development and urban planning, but they can be recognized for their resilience, recognized for their contribution to the community, and maintained. So just extending on from the icons and from the photos, I guess the sort of what one might call the data collection that I've done is I've been learning the indigenous names for the different plants and animals that I've encountered. There's a lot of indigenous languages in Michigan: Ojibwe, Anishinaabe-Moan, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Wendat, and Iroquois are just a few of them. And by learning the indigenous names of the plants and animals, we can show respect for the indigenous history of Detroit, as well as the French and British history and US history. I think it's important that we use language that reflects all of the histories that are part of our city. And they build connection to and relationship to the land and water. So whenever I see a Canada goose fly by, I always say "Bonjour Nika" to say hello to the Canada goose. We have the Amik, the beaver, Miknak, the snapping turtle. My favorite, and one of my favorites, is Wawabiganuji, the deer mouse. I love that the little mouse has such a big name. Yeah, it's been really enjoyable to learn about to learn the different names and to try and remember them and to try and use them as much as possible to talk to the plants and the animals when I encounter them. And that is my experience of collecting data about Detroit wildlife. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. This is such a cool project. Yeah, so I guess we can move on to Ava before we get to our Q&As.
Hi, thank you. All right, I'm going to share my presentation now. Okay. All right, can everyone see this okay? Awesome, thank you. So I wanted to take this opportunity to uplift our Detroit Bird City project. I am the Conservation and Research Coordinator for Detroit Bird Alliance. Thank you for having me. And yeah, this is all about Detroit Bird City. which is our project in partnership with the City of Detroit and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to create native flower and grass meadows at some underutilized spaces at Detroit City Parks. And let me yeah, the first question we usually get is why meadows? And you know, there's a lot of emphasis on trees or wetlands or other kind of habitats of that nature, and we really want to uplift and emphasize meadows, which people do not think about as much. But Michigan used to have tons of meadows. You know, they were grasslands and prairies all across Michigan that were historically maintained by indigenous people using prescribed fire. But when European settlers came around, all of this nice flat land was really optimal to turn into farms and then later urban areas and suburban areas. And so Detroit Bird Alliance was interested in this meadow creation because there is, first of all, a huge loss in the bird population across North America in general, but also a very large amount of the birds lost are grassland birds and migratory birds. So we really wanted to focus on these species by creating these kind of little mini grasslands that we call our little meadows that support the grassland birds and also migratory birds that depend on these pieces for habitat during their migration. There's also the huge decline in pollinator species that we wanted to try to reverse with these native flower and grass meadows. So it supports birds and pollinators, and a huge factor of the species loss that we are facing is habitat loss. And like I mentioned before, almost half of the US is now suburban and urban areas. And that means that we have a lot of lawns. And there's some issue with lawns. They kind of came about as a way to show off wealth. They have pretty much zero ecological benefit. And they usually require an excess of water, pesticides, herbicides, for proper maintenance. They also use carbon for powering lawnmowers and such. And they also have wimpy little root systems that are very short and small and do not benefit or help maintain storm water. So we are trying to kind of take some of this lawn area, especially if it's like an overgrown lawn that is not being used in any way, and saying, how about we turn this into a flower meadow that the city was big on, because first of all, there's a lot less mowing that needs to be done. Instead of having this mowed lawn that needs to be mowed in the summer, I mean, maybe every other week or so, we can just let these areas grow and have these beautiful flowers. So the city kind of got on board with that rationale. And then also beneficial for the city is kind of like I just mentioned, these native flowers and grasses have these really large complex root systems that are helpful for breaking up the soil so that rainwater and stormwater can easily sink into the ground and be kind of like absorbed by these root systems, where if turf grass, you can see on the right, has little tiny roots that really don't do the same work. And then by creating this habitat area, we're also creating green space for people. And there's, you know, countless studies that show the mental health benefits, the physical health benefits, and community health benefits. And a big part of our project is making sure that these green spaces, sorry, I have a bird clock that goes off if you guys can hear that. Is making sure that these spaces feel welcoming to people. So I will touch on that in a sec. These Detroit Bird City Meadows are found all across Detroit right now, and we're just hoping to keep spreading these throughout. You can see the orange icons are where we have Detroit Bird City Meadows, and then the pink are some other natural habitat areas around Detroit. The green was just a potential meadow, but we're hoping to continue spreading these meadows throughout Detroit. And in order to support and create these meadows, we rely on a ton of different partners. I mentioned the City of Detroit and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is kind of our main partners that we work with, but we could not have the success that we have without all of our community partners that are really essential for connecting to each little neighborhood around the park. So to start with these parks, we start with outreach and planning, and it's really essential to make sure that the neighbors in the area actually want to have a native flower meadow. That's step number one, making sure people support the project. So that's really essential. And then getting people involved with kind of the layout of the meadow. So we had some Zoom meetings and in-person meetings as ways for people to kind of share what they would like to see at this green space. Then once we have the okay from the neighbors, we start by removing the turf grass and other invasive species and planting this really lovely seed mix of native flowers and grasses. And the really important part about this seed mix is that they're all native plants. Some of them are nearly native, you know, like Midwest native, but it's really important because a lot of the insects that we have are dependent on specific plants, and those would be the plants that they evolved with. So the native plants that were here before colonialism and all of that. And we need to support the bugs with native plants because birds need those bugs. Most songbirds feed their babies an all bug, all insect diet. So especially during the breeding season, they need a lot of bugs to feed their babies. Birds also have a super high metabolism, and so they're eating like every 15 minutes. So birds need a lot of bugs, and those bugs need native plants. And then once things get growing, the meadows have to be mowed a couple times throughout the summer. And that is because there's still going to be some invasive plants coming up. And we have to cut back those plants and allow the native plants to kind of catch up to them. So we mow for the first 3 years about 3 to 5 times. So there is some mowing in the beginning, and then after that, we can really cut back on mowing. We only have to mow like every other year. And what's even more ideal is instead of mowing is actually doing a prescribed burn. And we are hoping to do that at 2 of our meadows in the spring. So we'll see if that happens. And then we have pathways through the meadows, which are so important for allowing people to actually come into the space and like be surrounded by nature instead of just standing on the outside of it. So these pathways are really important, and it's a lot of work to keep them up, but I just believe that they're so essential to the project. And then along with pathways, we have benches and signs so that people can know what they're looking at. People can know that they're invited to come into the park and stay. Also a couple of the little free libraries at some of the parks as well. And then we also do a lot of programming and cleanup events to keep people involved. If people are kind of newer to interacting with nature, we have these events so that they can come and learn with somebody else and kind of be welcomed into things that way. And then volunteer events to keep people involved. They can help us clean up trash that always seems to blow in, and then also help with managing some of those invasive species that come into the meadows as well. And then, yeah, keeping people involved. We also have plenty of interesting wildlife that comes in. Over on the left side here, we have our beautiful indigo buntings that have taken up habitat, taking up residence at some of our parks, which are very exciting. A lot of different butterfly and bee species, and then some other migratory birds as well. So all of this wildlife is super exciting to see. and we're just very happy with the success of the parks and meadows so far. And we have a lot more that are coming. So yeah, stay involved, contact me for more information. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for having me at this forum.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all that great work.
Yeah.
Love to see a green space. I've recently ended up on the native plant side of TikTok. So yeah, filling up my front yard with some cone flowers. So very cool to see those make their appearance. So I think I'll open it up first to our audience if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask our presenters.
Should I raise my hand? I want to be
No,
a-
you can go ahead. Just ask your question.
Hi. My name is Dennis, and first of all, I want to thank you guys. This is kind of a really unusual presentation. I'm a Detroit resident, so I love knowing more about my city. But I just want to say what made this really interesting to me is I among my gigs, I'm an agent for authors, and interestingly enough, they have this speculative science fiction book come out, but there's a whole part of it that deals with the ecology and deals with um, how when we live in a city, how we interact with our environment. So I don't have a question as much as when I go tonight to the Source Bookstore for our big presentation, I will sound smarter because you guys helped out. And if you're not doing anything tonight, please come if you're in Detroit, the Source Bookstore.
Oh, what event do you have going on?
The authors wrote a book, and I mean, this is your thing. I don't want to pitch it, but the book that they wrote is a sci-fi novel, but really they want to talk about the ecology. They want to talk about humanity. They just put it in a sci-fi book. So the authors are giving a presentation tonight at our lovely bookstore. So that's all. But great job. I wanted just to tell you guys I've really enjoyed that a lot. I like the cat too. Thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I do have a few key questions as well. Okay. All right. Yeah. So some of the questions that I had were asking about some of the like frequent types of human wildlife interactions that are reported or tend to take place in the city, and how are those usually perceived by residents, and how maybe, would you want to change how those are perceived? Yeah. Any of
Yeah.
our panelists, feel free.
I'd love to start things off. When I saw this question, I was super excited to talk about bird and window collisions. And I think that those are super interesting because they're really perceived as like a one-off thing. Many people have found a bird or seen a bird hit a window and they're like, oh my God, what a crazy event that never happens. And there's this idea that it is not common, but really these window collisions are happening all the time. They're happening at all types of buildings, not just skyscrapers. And they are a huge issue. They're like number 3 reason for bird population decline. And they're really something that should be addressed and really will need to be addressed as we keep on seeing this decline in migratory bird populations. And as we are building more and more buildings that are all glass. So if you're building something new, I would really recommend looking into bird safe glass or some bird safe glass window retrofits, because these bird window collisions kill a lot of birds. They significantly impact migratory bird populations. Even if the bird flies away from the window, it's likely going to die later from head trauma. So it's a really sad situation and really common. Detroit is at the intersection of 2 major flyways, 2 out of the 4 US flyways. So we have a lot of birds migrating through here. And it would really be great to have this city be like a safe migratory pathway for birds. And I think that we have the chance to do that. So yeah, that's my first thought of a really big human-animal interaction that we have here in the city.
Thank you. Any of the other presenters have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that, which I think sort of one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is animal sacrifice in the city and the way that we sacrifice animals to our obsession with cars and our commitment to cars. And we don't see it as animal sacrifice, right? We think that animal sacrifice is something that people did when they killed a goat to get 100 years ago for some sort of, to try and get whatever. But we still are sacrificing animals every day to our obsession with the automobile. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is how to make a sort of community map of the animals that are sacrificed in our city over the course of the year, where people could sort of send in when they encounter an animal that's been sacrificed on the streets, and we could really see like the impact of our car life on wildlife in our city, on animals in our city. Check.
Great.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
just
yeah, go ahead.
add, one of the major concerns that we see in terms of thinking about some of the human wildlife interactions have to do with domestic species. So how we're actually managing our pets. And so from the perspective of thinking about pet care, the feral population of cats and dogs are pretty extensive throughout the city. And so I think we need to do a much better job in terms of thinking about what types of interventions are in place from that perspective. Even when we do have dogs that are, for example, we're walking our dog, how much you're letting them off leash? Are you cleaning up after your pet when they, defecate? Are you letting your cat outside? Is it catching birds? Is it catching mice? It means that it's translating into these being competitors for the urban wildlife. And so there's additional harm that comes with that and additional conflict that comes with that. Do you have dog food or cat food outside, right? That can be a lure and bringing wild animals into our backyards and exacerbating conflict even further. So there's lots of things that we need to do from that perspective. And then incidentally, I would say another aspect is around our trash and sanitation management, right? And so how are you managing your trash? Do you have lids on your trash cans? When do you put out your trash? What does that look like? That's another kind of lure or another exacerbator, right? In terms of adding more potential opportunities for conflict with wildlife in the city.
Great. So it looks like we have a question in the chat from Nicole who asks, what has been the most effective way to get folks in the community involved? Uh, any thoughts on that?
I can go ahead. I can speak on that
Yeah.
a little bit. It definitely is, so important to really meet people where they are. So I think that just thinking about our the parks that we have been working on, a lot of people just really like the benefits of walking and having like a nice, beautiful place to walk, especially for like walking their dog or for health benefits. And so I think that just like creating a space where people can kind of continue this like little health routine that also kind of like brings them into a green space has been like a successful way for us to kind of pull people in who might not otherwise be as interested in like being involved with a green space. And then also like the flowers and beauty aspect. I feel like there is a very large like gardening culture in Detroit. And so I think that that kind of nicely ties in with our native flower meadows and kind of creating a connection between those two ideas. And also encouraging people, we do seed collection in the fall and people can collect seeds and then grow their own flowers. and showing how these big tall flowers don't have to look wild and crazy. They can be kind of grown in a way with like nice borders or other kind of like defining markers that make them look very purposeful and beautiful. Yeah, those are some of the first connections that I make. And then for like talking about birds, there's just some bird species that people are really drawn to. And like the first one I would think of is like hummingbirds. Talking about like birds or flowers that support hummingbirds, and that's a good little stepping stone. Everybody loves a hummingbird, everybody loves the ring-necked pheasants, and so there's just certain species that people have more of like a relationship with.
Ava, I'm laughing over here as the like scientist in me, like hummingbirds are such jerks though, and no one knows that they're jerks. They're just like so beautiful until you actually learn about I'm not trying to be anti-hummingbird, but
I get it. I totally agree. I totally agree. Yep.
So my response to that question, I would say I don't think we have the secret sauce. But I do like Ava's point in terms of saying to meet people where they are. And so we've certainly gone into different spaces, whether it be the Detroit Zoo, whether it be the Michigan Science Center, the Outdoor Adventure Center. Like we've gone into places and set up booths and had community conversations. But they end up being kind of one-off events, right? And so I think that there's really this need to think about what does a wildlife campaign for the city actually look like? And there's different ways we could think about how communities could be then involved in participating. I am going to put a link in the chat for those that may not be familiar. iNaturalist is a community science initiative and platform where you can record your observations of wildlife that you see throughout the city. And so that's just a way of us taking advantage of us being outside, making us more observant of our shared spaces, and actually like contributing to data collection and data sharing opportunities. And so I would say that that's kind of an indirect, more kind of passive way of getting people involved, but that certainly represents an opportunity. I've gone into elementary school classes. I've participated in science fairs. But again, the scale and the scope of those things don't feel very sustainable. And I don't know what type of impact it has, right? Even though there's a lot of time and a lot of effort that goes into it. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about kind of coordination. And so these types of forums are really good to see what partners and players are out there. What are some of the interests? What are some of the needs? How can we do something creative? If anyone knows anyone at the Detroit Tigers or the Detroit Lions, I want to have some conversations with them because I feel like there's a wildlife opportunity there. So let's galvanize and figure out how to make something like that happen. Again, meeting people where they are, whether it's in stadiums, whether it's in museums, whether it's at zoos, whether it's in our parks. I think there's a real opportunity, and Detroit is a special place where those types of conversations can really happen, and we can put Detroit really on the forefront of some of those conversations. I think it's a missed opportunity, or an opportunity rather, that we can strategize on how to be more effective in engaging the community. So thank you for that question.
Awesome. Looks like we have a comment from Tim talking about wildlife making gardening challenging. I'm going to formulate that into a question. What do you think are some ways that we can better kind of coexist with our gardening hobbies and our wildlife that we have going on in the city?
I will respond to that. That's a great question because deer will eat anything. There are some native plants that have kind of evolved with deer. And so they are either minty or they're fuzzy, which the deer don't love as much. Of course, the big point is that deer will eat anything when they're hungry. And they like to eat little baby plants too. But if you are able to, have a area with like plants that are larger and have some of these native plants that have these characteristics that deer don't like, I think you can have like a little bit more luck with having the deer not eating your plants. But
Like
it
a
is
little
very
glass in
tricky.
the place. That's Perfect.
And
You
there
don't
is
mind?
a big issue that we have in Detroit with deer populations because we do not have predators to kind of keep those populations in check. So that's a huge difficulty. The deer populations are just going to keep growing. I believe the white-tailed deer have just moved on to Belle Isle somewhat recently, and so that's going to be a huge issue. The deer in Palmer Park are out of control. And so the deer are definitely an issue. And yeah, my big takeaway here is kind of looking at some of those native plants that are deer resistant with like either mint characteristics or being fuzzy. That's my best. Also having we have like these large meadows, and once you plant something that large, like the deer can't eat it all. So that, is a little bit of something to think about too, but I don't have a great solution for that because the deer, are, just have an overpopulation issue, which there's no easy solution for.
Yeah, and this is a national phenomenon, right, of the deer population growth. And so a lot of DNR, Department of Natural Resource agencies and organizations are trying to figure out the best kind of mitigation strategies. Are we culling? Are we thinking about contraception? Are we thinking about predator control? What are the options that exist? And the reality is that until we start thinking about the system very much as an ecosystem, right? That what we do in our county or what we do in our city is how effective our interventions are in our city or our county is also dependent on what our next city and our partner neighboring county is doing, right? So that means that there has to be a lot of coordination there. I would also say that there's just an aspect around habitat management, right? And so our wild spaces that we do have, our urban parks that we do have, are they providing suitable habitat, right, for wildlife so that they don't have to venture off into backyards and lawns, et cetera. So there's very much a partnership between what residents can do and what then our city officials and agencies and organizations could also be doing, right? So that partnership really has to be there for us to be effective in thinking about how we're managing the deer population. And I'm a carnivore biologist, so I'm all for we need carnivores to be helping and letting carnivores do their thing. But that's not a widely acceptable solution in most cities.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much. My grandpa's hot tip was to always plant spicy peppers on the perimeter. I don't know if that's how effective that is, but that's usually how he deterred some wildlife, if that is helpful to anyone. Um, okay, yeah. Well, we are getting towards the end of our meeting here. I'll keep it open in case anyone else has any questions. Let's see. As far as my quick key questions, though, I think we kind of touched on most of these. Talking about how wildlife data can inform urban planning decisions like green infrastructure, park development, or vacant land reuse. I guess what are some, if you had a magic wand, what would you change in the city regarding how vacant land or park development is done?
I guess I can jump in. I have very strong views about the quote unquote greenway and the enormous amount of concrete and the bulldozing of the resilient plants and the marshlands and the stuff that have grown up around the train tracks, and how we're going to bulldoze them to put in a concrete quote unquote greenway and surrounded by mowed grass. We've just had a whole conversation about turf grass. So I think, yeah, if I could change one thing about the city, I would just one thing at this precise moment, it would be the way that the as the greenway can quote unquote greenway continues to be developed, that it be more aware of and in relationship to the plants and animals that are living on the area that they're turning into the quote unquote greenway, rather than just destroying those communities and replacing them with concrete. Check.
I have another question, if I'm allowed to ask it.
Yeah, please.
I was thinking about what one of the panelists said about lawns and the fact that we largely, that grass lawns don't really help us a whole lot, bad root systems, etc. So, like, I have a lawn and I would like to have a better, I don't have a problem getting rid of my grass. Like, how should I think about that? Where like, do I gotta Google that, YouTube it? Or since you guys are so smart, maybe you can point me in the right direction.
I would love to point you in the right direction. There are some native plant landscapers who have popped up who might be the simplest way to
No,
go
wait,
about it.
my wife will not allow that. She
Oh,
is the king of the
okay.
dirt.
Then you can either do a you could do a like native plant garden using plugs. A great place to purchase plugs is through Keep Growing Detroit.
Yes.
And there's also Feral Flora, Michigan NC Natives,
Hmm.
Detroit Wildflower Farm, I think they're called. So plant plugs are a great option for planting. And then also you could, if you have like a larger space, you could copy our like meadow method of doing, of spreading the seeds and then kind of mowing it throughout the summer. And it's a much longer process. It's kind of like either go with planting plugs and you have to weed the area, or go with seeds and you have to mow the area. But there's definitely plenty of resources online of how to go about that, or if you want to email me directly, I'm happy to help with that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And reduce the herbicide and pesticide use.
We already don't use that at all.
Okay, great.
All right, awesome. This was a fantastic data forum. Thank you all so much to all our panelists. I really enjoyed this. I think this was definitely a highlight of one of our data forums we've had this year. Yeah, thank you all again for your time and sharing everything. There will be a forthcoming blog post on our blog that will have a summary of all of this. And then if you have any resources you'd like me to share in that blog post, please send them to me and I will definitely include it.
And I'm just adding a couple links, so maybe Julian, you can add this to the post as well.
Definitely.
Cool. This was awesome. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. I hope we are thoughtful and considerate and sharing space with our urban wildlife and our urban neighbors, and look forward to future engagement and interactions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.